Mom left kid to die in blazing car. What I found will horrify you. A mother's meltdown over missing her soap operas nearly became her son's death sentence in a scorching parking lot. What looked like typical entitled behavior turned into a desperate rescue mission when her own cruel words revealed the horrifying truth about the child dying in her car. This isn't just another entitled parent story. It's a horrifying tale of how selfish priorities and parental neglect created a life-threatening emergency that turned an ordinary grocery trip into a desperate rescue mission where every second counted. Deadly heat created the most shocking child endangerment case I've ever witnessed, the innocent shopping trip that became a nightmare. The day started like any other routine grocery run, but the weather was absolutely brutal in a way that should have made every parent extra cautious. The temperature had climbed to 35 degrees Celsius, which translates to about 95 degrees Fahrenheit, but the humidity and blazing sun made it feel like a suffocating 111 degrees. This wasn't just uncomfortable summer heat, this was the kind of dangerous temperature that turns cars into ovens and makes every minute outside feel like an endurance test. I had ducked into my local supermarket for a quick shopping trip, carrying just about 10 items that included some frozen goods, drinks, and snacks. Nothing major, nothing that should take more than a few minutes to purchase and get back to the safety of air conditioning. I always keep one earbud out while shopping because I've learned that people sometimes need to ask questions or make polite conversation, and I don't want to be that guy who's completely oblivious to the world around him. The checkout line was moving at its typical pace, with one customer finishing up their payment at the register and one person standing directly in front of me. It was the kind of ordinary supermarket scene that plays out thousands of times every day across the country. Nothing remarkable, nothing that would suggest the life or death drama that was about to unfold. That's when she appeared, and honestly, she looked like any other shopper you'd encounter on a Tuesday afternoon. There was nothing immediately threatening about her appearance, no obvious red flags that screamed dangerous person or bad parent. Her initial approach was even polite and reasonable, the kind of interaction that happens between strangers every day without incident. "Excuse me, do you mind if I skip ahead? I'm in a hurry," she said, and her tone was genuinely nice at first. Under normal circumstances, this is exactly the kind of request I usually don't mind accommodating. If someone politely asks to cut in line and I don't have any urgent business of my own, I'm generally happy to let them go first. It's a small kindness that costs me nothing and might make someone else's day a little easier. But this situation was different, and the math was simple enough to calculate in my head within seconds. I was holding maybe 10 items that would take the cashier less than 2 minutes to scan, while she was pushing a shopping cart that was absolutely loaded with groceries. We're talking about the kind of full cart that suggests a major weekly shopping trip, the type that takes 15 to 20 minutes to process even with an efficient cashier. If I let her cut in front of me, my quick grocery run would turn into a half-hour ordeal, standing behind her while she had every item scanned, bagged, and paid for. Meanwhile, my frozen goods would be melting and I'd be stuck in the store for significantly longer than planned. So, I made what seemed like a reasonable decision at the time. I politely declined her request and told her I would hurry through my own checkout as quickly as possible. I had no idea that this simple, logical refusal would trigger a chain of events that would nearly cost a child his life. But the tragedy was about to begin with the most shocking transformation I've ever witnessed. What started as a polite request to skip the grocery line exploded into a psychotic meltdown when this entitled mother revealed her emergency was getting home to watch television, while her child was literally dying outside. The mask of civility didn't just slip off. It was ripped away to reveal someone so consumed with selfishness that missing a television show became more important than her own child's survival. The instant I politely declined her request, she transformed from a reasonable person into something absolutely terrifying. Her face contorted with rage as if I had committed the most heinous crime imaginable, and the volume of her voice skyrocketed to levels that made every other customer in the store turn and stare. "I'm in a hurry," she screamed, her entitlement erupting like a volcano that had been building pressure for years. What came next revealed the true depths of her twisted priorities. As she continued her public meltdown, screaming about how inconsiderate and selfish I was being, she finally revealed the earth-shattering emergency that justified her desperate need to cut in line. "I have to be home in time for my shows," she shrieked, as if this was some kind of life or death medical situation that required immediate action. Let me repeat that because the absurdity of it needs to sink in. Her emergency was television programming. Not a sick relative, not a work crisis. Not a childcare emergency, she was having a complete psychological breakdown because she might miss her afternoon television shows. This woman was demanding special treatment and throwing a tantrum that could be heard 3 aisles away because her entertainment schedule was more important than basic human decency. As her rant continued, the cashier made the professional decision to ignore the spectacle and began scanning my groceries with practiced efficiency. I loaded my items into bags while this woman continued her verbal assault, calling me garbage and demanding that store management ban me permanently for the crime of not letting her cut in line. The other customers watched in fascination and horror as someone's entitlement reached levels that defied rational explanation. Her language became increasingly vicious as she realized that neither I nor the store employees were going to bow to her demands. She accused me of ruining her entire day, of being the worst kind of person, and of deliberately sabotaging her life because I refused to accommodate her television viewing schedule. The irony was lost on her completely. She was creating a scene that was actually making her later than if she had simply waited her turn like every other adult in the store. I tried to maintain my composure and hurry through the checkout process, hoping that paying for my groceries and leaving would end this nightmare interaction. The cashier worked as quickly as possible, clearly wanting to get me out of there so the screaming woman would either calm down or become someone else's problem. Other customers began changing lanes to avoid the drama, creating a buffer zone around this woman's toxic behavior. What should have been the end of an unpleasant but ultimately forgettable encounter was about to take a turn that would haunt me forever. As I finished paying and prepared to escape this woman's insanity, she was about to say something that would reveal a horror beyond anything I could have imagined. Her obsession with television was about to expose a level of child endangerment so severe that it would turn a grocery store confrontation into a race against death itself. The worst part wasn't her entitlement or her verbal abuse, it was what I was about to discover about the innocent victim of her selfishness. Right at that moment, as I walked away thinking this nightmare was finally over, her parting insult about telling her son why he had to wait longer triggered the horrifying realization that sent me racing through a scorching parking lot, desperately searching for a child who might already be dead. What should have been the end of an unpleasant encounter became the beginning of a life-or-death emergency when her own words revealed the most shocking child endangerment I've ever witnessed. I had finished paying for my groceries and was about to put my earbud back in, grateful to escape this woman's toxic meltdown and return to my normal day. The relief was overwhelming. I could finally get my frozen goods home before they melted and put this entire unpleasant experience behind me forever. I thought the worst part was over, that I had survived an encounter with an entitled parent and could move on with my life. That's when she delivered the words that changed everything and revealed the true horror of what was happening. As I walked toward the exit, she screamed after me with venomous rage. "If you pass by my car, tell my son he's the reason he has to wait another half hour for me." The casual cruelty of using her child as a weapon in her tantrum was disgusting enough, but my brain immediately began processing the terrifying implications of what she had just revealed. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that my blood ran cold as the math became crystal clear. First, it was brutally hot outside, the kind of temperature that turns vehicles into death traps within minutes. Second, based on her overflowing shopping cart, this woman had clearly been inside the store for a significant amount of time, probably 30 to 40 minutes at minimum. Third, the entire parking lot was a sun-bleached concrete wasteland with virtually no shade anywhere. The most terrifying factor was the timing. It was approximately 2 p.m., which meant the sun was at its peak intensity and beating down mercilessly on every surface. Cars parked in that lot would have been absorbing heat for hours, turning their interiors into furnaces that could easily reach temperatures exceeding 120 degrees Fahrenheit. If there was a child sitting in one of those vehicles, every minute could be the difference between life and death. I dropped my groceries and started running through the parking lot like a man possessed, scanning every car I passed for signs of a child inside. The panic was overwhelming as I realized that if this woman had really left her son in a car during this heat wave, I might already be too late to save him. Each vehicle I checked without finding anything made my heart race faster, knowing that somewhere in this concrete oven, a child might be fighting for his life. The search felt endless even though it probably lasted less than a minute. Car after car was empty, and I began to hope that maybe I had misunderstood, that perhaps her son was with someone else or safe inside another store. But then I reached a sedan parked in the direct sunlight, and what I saw through the window made my heart stop completely. A small child was lying motionless in the back seat, and he looked like he was already dying. His skin was ghostly pale, except for the bright red flush of heat exhaustion. Sweat was pouring off his tiny body, and his eyes were only half open in a way that suggested he was barely conscious. This wasn't just a hot child who was uncomfortable. This was a child in the advanced stages of heat stroke, minutes away from organ failure and death. The woman inside the store, screaming about her television shows, had left her son to die in a furnace while she shopped for groceries and threw tantrums about missing her entertainment programs. No one expected what I discovered when I burst back into that store. I found her child barely conscious and dying from heat stroke. But when I rushed back inside, this monster was casually chatting with the cashier about her groceries like her son wasn't fighting for his life 50 feet away. The contrast between a child's desperate struggle for survival and his mother's complete indifference to his suffering revealed a level of parental neglect so shocking that it defied human comprehension. The sprint back into the store felt like running through quicksand as precious seconds ticked away while a child's life hung in the balance. Every step was fueled by a mixture of panic and rage that I had never experienced before. Panic because I knew that child had minutes before irreversible organ damage set in, and rage because his own mother was inside shopping while he cooked alive in her car. When I reached the checkout area, the scene that greeted me was so surreal that it took a moment to process. There she was, the woman who had just finished screaming at me about missing her television shows, now engaging in pleasant small talk with the cashier as if nothing in the world was wrong. She was discussing the weather, commenting on grocery prices, and making casual observations about her purchases while her son was literally dying in the parking lot. The disconnect was so extreme that it felt like witnessing two different realities colliding. In one reality, a child was experiencing the final stages of heat exhaustion in a car that had become a death trap. In the other reality, his mother was having a friendly conversation about everyday topics, completely oblivious to or uncaring about the medical emergency unfolding outside. I didn't have time for subtlety or politeness. I grabbed her by the shoulders, spun her around to face me, and got as close to her face as possible before delivering the words that should have sent any parent into immediate panic mode. "Your kid is literally dying in your car," I said, my voice carrying every ounce of urgency and desperation I felt. "If you don't do something right now, I'm smashing in your windows and calling the cops." Her initial reaction was complete confusion, as if I was speaking a foreign language or talking about someone else's child. She stared at me with blank incomprehension, probably never having been confronted so directly or aggressively in her entire entitled life. For a few seconds, she looked like someone trying to solve a complex mathematical equation, unable to process the connection between her shopping trip and her son's life-threatening situation. Then the realization hit her like a physical blow, and I watched the color drain from her face as the gravity of what I was telling her finally penetrated her self-absorbed bubble. The transformation was instant and terrifying, from casual shopper to panicked parent in the span of a heartbeat. Without another word, she abandoned her groceries and ran toward the exit, finally showing the urgency that should have driven her behavior from the moment she left her child in that car. As she rushed outside, I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned to see a middle-aged man who had been observing the situation. "What happened?" he asked, his voice filled with concern and confusion about the dramatic scene he had just witnessed. I quickly explained that I had found a child suffering from heat stroke in the parking lot and that this woman was apparently his mother. His expression immediately shifted to one of understanding and alarm. "I'll go check on the situation," he said, heading toward the exit with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested he knew exactly how serious this was. What I didn't know at that moment was that this man was about to become the most important witness to what would unfold next, and his professional background would make all the difference in ensuring that justice was served. But the tragedy was about to take the most infuriating turn possible. After nearly killing her own child for television shows, this delusional mother tried to blame me for his condition, but an off-duty cop had witnessed everything and was about to destroy her pathetic excuses with handcuffs. What followed was the most satisfying moment of justice I've ever witnessed, where entitled delusion crashed headfirst into the reality of law enforcement and criminal consequences. When I emerged from the store, I expected to find a panicked mother desperately trying to cool down her overheated child and calling for medical help. Instead, I was greeted by the most shocking display of blame-shifting and denial I had ever encountered. The moment she saw me, this woman came charging toward me with the fury of someone who genuinely believed she was the victim in this situation. "This is all your fault," she screamed, getting directly in my face with an aggression that would have been intimidating if it wasn't so completely insane. "If you had just let me go first, I would have been done shopping and my son wouldn't be like this. The audacity of her logic was breathtaking. She was actually trying to convince me that her decision to leave a child in a death trap was somehow my responsibility because I wouldn't let her cut in line. Her finger was inches from my face as she continued her delusional rant, insisting that the delay I had caused by making her wait behind me was the direct cause of her son's heat stroke. According to her twisted reasoning, the extra few minutes she had to wait for my checkout had pushed her son from safe to dying, as if those minutes were the difference between responsible parenting and child endangerment. Before I could even begin to respond to this insanity, the man who had followed us outside stepped forward and revealed information that would change everything. "Ma'am, I'm an off-duty police officer," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with people who think they can lie their way out of consequences. "I've been in that store for over 30 minutes, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that this man's checkout delay could not have caused your child's condition." The impact of his words was immediate and devastating. The woman's face went through a series of expressions as she realized that her carefully constructed blame narrative had just been destroyed by an eyewitness with professional law enforcement credentials. Her entitled rage began to deflate as the reality of her situation became impossible to deny. "I've already called an ambulance for your child and backup for you," the officer continued, his tone becoming more official with each word. "You're going to be arrested for child endangerment, and I suggest you start thinking about how you're going to explain to a judge why you left a child in a car during dangerous heat conditions while you shopped for groceries and argued about television shows." The psychological breakdown that followed was complete and immediate. This woman who had been screaming and pointing fingers just moments before suddenly collapsed onto the hot pavement and began shaking her head in denial. The reality of criminal charges, public exposure, and the loss of her child's safety had finally penetrated her entitled bubble. "Not my fault," she kept repeating through sobs, as if saying it enough times would make it true. "Not my fault." But her words carried no conviction now. They were the desperate mantras of someone whose entire worldview had just crumbled under the weight of consequences she never thought would apply to her. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air as both ambulance and police backup arrived on scene, transforming what had started as a grocery store confrontation into a full-scale emergency response with flashing lights and trained professionals taking control of a situation that should never have happened. Right at that moment, as the sirens wailed and justice finally arrived, the child survived, the mother got arrested, and the legal system delivered consequences, but the pathetically light punishment she received proves that some people only learn when it's too late, and the damage is already done. What should have been a story of severe criminal penalties became a frustrating reminder that child endangerment laws often treat near-death experiences as minor infractions worthy of little more than a slap on the wrist. The paramedics worked with professional efficiency to stabilize the child, immediately recognizing the severe symptoms of advanced heat stroke and beginning emergency cooling procedures. Watching them work was both relieving and heartbreaking. Relieving because he was finally getting the medical attention he desperately needed, but heartbreaking because this entire nightmare could have been prevented if his mother had made different choices about her priorities. While the medical team fought to save her son's life, the entitled mother was being processed by police officers who had clearly dealt with similar cases before. The handcuffs going on her wrist should have been a moment of pure satisfaction, but instead it felt hollow knowing that the legal system's response to child endangerment is often disappointingly weak compared to the severity of the crime. I provided my statement to the investigating officers, detailing everything from the initial grocery store confrontation to discovering the child in the car. They took my contact information and warned me that I might be called as a witness if the case went to court, though they seemed doubtful that it would progress that far given the typical handling of these situations. The most heartbreaking part was watching the child's father arrive at the hospital. Someone had called him from the scene, and his face carried the mixture of terror and rage that any parent would feel discovering their child had nearly died due to the other parent's negligence. He thanked me repeatedly for finding his son, but his gratitude was overshadowed by the obvious strain of processing how close he had come to losing his child forever. The legal update I received days later was both expected and infuriating. The police contacted me to review my statement and inform me about the likely outcome of the case. Instead of serious criminal charges that would reflect the gravity of nearly killing a child, the mother would probably receive what they called a municipal administrative sanction, essentially a fine that treats child endangerment like a parking violation. The officer explained that unless the child had been seriously injured or died, The standard punishment for this level of negligence was typically just a financial penalty. The amount of the fine wasn't disclosed, but given the casual way it was described, it clearly wasn't substantial enough to serve as a meaningful deterrent for future incidents. This outcome highlighted a fundamental flaw in how society treats child endangerment cases. A mother who chose television programming over her child's survival, who left him to nearly die in a furnace while she shopped and threw tantrums about missing her shows, would face consequences roughly equivalent to a traffic ticket. The message this sends is that children's lives are worth less than the inconvenience of serious legal penalties. I haven't seen the family since that day, and I don't know if they moved away, changed their shopping habits, or simply avoid that store now. What I do know is that a child's life was saved by a combination of quick thinking and sheer luck, but the system's response to his near-death experience was a bureaucratic shrug that treated his suffering as a minor administrative issue. The most important outcome is that the child survived. But the inadequate consequences for his mother serve as a reminder that sometimes justice is measured not by punishment, but by the simple fact that an innocent life was preserved despite the adults who failed to protect it. Sometimes the difference between life and death is a stranger who refuses to walk away when something feels wrong. I learned that some people's selfishness runs so deep they'll risk their own child's life for trivial conveniences, but thankfully there are still people who value human life over minding their own business. The most important lesson is simple. If you see something that doesn't feel right, trust your instincts and act, because you might be the only thing standing between tragedy and an innocent life. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button to help others find it. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. And subscribe to join our community of resilient souls who've learned that sometimes being underestimated is your greatest superpower. Together, we're writing new endings to old stories, and I can't wait to share the next chapter with you.